Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I jumped the gun. Madam Speaker, I seek leave to deliver a ministerial report on the 2025 federal budget.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted. Continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this morning I rise to speak about the disgraceful federal budget handed down in Canberra last night, which has profoundly let down the Northern Territory and every single one of its 255,000 residents. This week's federal budget wasn't even on the cards, Madam Speaker. The smart money assumed that we'd be heading to the polls on April 12, wiping out any chance of the usual March budget drama. But ex-tropical cyclone Alfred threw out all those plans, and now here we are, stuck with a budget that no one really expected, and it certainly shows, Madam Speaker. This is, without exaggeration, Madam Speaker, the worst federal budget ever handed down to the Northern Territory since we gained self-government back in 1978. Madam Speaker, Territorians have been given nothing short of a slap in the face by the Albanese Labor government. Consider this. Out of a staggering $786 billion in the total federal budget, an almost incomprehensible sum, the Northern Territory has received only one new conditional commitment of $200 million. And that's conditional, Madam Speaker. That's right, $200 million out of $786 billion. It's an insult, absolutely plain and simple. Contrast this with the clear and urgent priorities outlined by our own Chief Minister in a direct letter to the Prime Minister in December last year. The Chief Minister highlighted the crucial areas desperately needing attention: our defence capabilities, road infrastructure, gas development in the Beetaloo Basin, population growth initiatives, tailored migration policies, aviation improvements, resilience initiatives and mineral resource development. All of these critical points were clearly spelled out as fundamental, Madam Speaker, to the Territory's future. Yet what was Canberra's response last night? Complete and utter neglect. Labor has spent months promising Territorians the equivalent of a trip to Disneyland and raising hopes and expectations. But when it came time to deliver, Madam Speaker, all we got was enough funding for a modest night out at Time Zone in Casuarina. This morning on ABC Radio, we heard Labor Senator Malarndirri McCarthy trying to threaten Territorians that the feds will take their money away. The Senator made reference to how much money the feds contribute to our overall budget and that our CLP needed to be very careful in our language. Well, Madam Speaker, I've got news for Senator McCarthy. This isn't your money, it's taxpayers' money. The money of hard-working Australians and hard-working Territorians who, under your total failure of a Labor government, are struggling to make ends meet. How dare the Senator threaten to stand over Territorians because we are doing what's right and standing up for the people of the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. We are calling it for what it is. It is a sham. But, Madam Speaker, this is how the Labor Party rolls. When they get challenged, they don't like it. And then in the next breath, they threaten to take our money away. Madam Speaker, it's time for Senator McCarthy, Marion Scrimgeour and Luke Gosling to take a long, hard look at themselves. All three have failed the Territory miserably. Madam Speaker, it is absolutely outrageous, and the insult doesn't end there. One of the critical issues facing the Territory is the uncertainty surrounding the Darwin port. It's crucial infrastructure, not just for our economy, but also for our national security and defence interests. But what clarity or certainty did we receive last night? I can tell you, Madam Speaker, absolutely none. Labor's federal member for Solomon, Luke Gosling, has repeatedly promised Territorians that announcements were imminent, claiming a public-private partnership was on the horizon. Well, Madam Speaker, the budget has made crystal clear exactly how much weight Luke Gosling carries in Canberra. His own federal colleagues have cut him loose completely. He's been left isolated, floating aimlessly and looking utterly irrelevant. Around Darwin and the top end, we have a word for that. He's behaving like a goose, Madam Speaker. And now it seems Canberra thinks exactly the same. Darwin Port isn't some minor project. It's essential infrastructure, vital to our trade, crucial for industry, and a fundamental piece for creating and protecting jobs in the Territory. Given its strategic role in Australia's defence capabilities and regional security, you would think it would be front and centre of any responsible federal government thinking. But clearly Labor doesn't see it that way. If Prime Minister Anthony Albanese could find some time and money to secure steel production in Whyalla, why can't he offer the same certainty for support of the Darwin port? Madam Speaker, the reality is that the federal Labor government does not see us as equally important. We are an afterthought at best, so it seems. We're a distant speck on the Canberra radar, and that is an absolute disgrace and shameful and disgusting for all Territorians. We have made a compelling case to Canberra for bold initiatives, including tax incentives to encourage people to live and work here, to revive our population growth, retain skilled workers and incentivise investment in the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. Yet Labor's federal budget completely ignored these essential measures to boost our economy and our community. Additionally, we requested flexible migration policies tailored to the Territory's unique circumstances, streamline visa processes and incentives to attract skilled migrants, alleviate skill shortages and effectively service remote areas. Once again, Canberra's budget last night provided nothing to address these pressing needs. But Madam Speaker, Luke Gosling isn't the only culprit here. Territorians have two other Labor representatives in Canberra, Marion Scrimgeour and Malandiri McCarthy. And what exactly have these representatives been doing, I ask, Madam Speaker? Where are their voices in this federal budget to support the Northern Territory? Have they stood up for Territorians? Have they argued passionately on our behalf? The evidence last night says loud and clear they have not. Instead, all three of our Labor representatives have sat silent while billions were showered on other parts of regional Australia. Other regional areas are seeing transformative projects, funding boosts that will create jobs and drive growth. And what have we been offered? A paltry maintenance budget, routine funds that keep things tickling along but achieve absolutely nothing in terms of real growth or prosperity for the people of the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, now let's talk about Middle Arm. Here we have an economic goldmine, a precinct perfectly situated for industrial expansion, liquid natural gas export and mineral processing. It has everything, Madam Speaker, strategically positioned, proximity to our major international shipping routes and incredible potential to generate thousands of new jobs. But in Canberra last night, what did we see for Middle Arm? Nothing. Not a single dollar was specifically allocated to accelerate its development. All the funding sits there in Infrastructure Australia and is equity funding. There was no cash allocated. This is economic negligence, Madam Speaker. It's deliberate neglect by federal Labor, and Territorians should see this for exactly what it is, absolute contempt. The Chief Minister has clearly emphasised to the Prime Minister that roads like the Stewart Highway, Barclay and Victoria highways are lifelines for industry, tourism and remote communities, and that improving these roads is strategically vital. Despite their critical importance to economic development and regional connectivity, Canberra's budget last night failed to provide even a single cent towards this essential infrastructure. And it's not just about economic projects. Madam Speaker, let's look at Kakadu National Park. This iconic World Heritage Site, a jewel of Australian tourism and Indigenous heritage, has been overlooked once again. 6 years ago, Luke Gosling stood proudly next to then opposition leader Bill Shorten and pledged $220 million for Kakadu. 6 years later, Madam Speaker, what's been delivered? Absolutely nothing. Zero. Donuts, not even crumbs. The neglect extends further. Our Chief Minister explicitly called on Canberra to provide better access to affordable and reliable air travel, highlighting its critical role in boosting tourism, supporting local business and improving the quality of life right across the Territory. Yet Canberra's federal budget made no effort to improve aviation connectivity. Is Kakadu no longer important to Labor? Does its cultural heritage mean nothing to Anthony Albanese and his colleagues? Apparently it seems not. Adding to this neglect, we have specifically urged Canberra for federal investment in resilience and capacity building initiatives, emphasising how frequently the Territory faces natural disasters and extreme weather events. Yet again, Canberra has ignored this critical need, leaving our communities and infrastructure vulnerable. Madam Speaker, what about the Beetaloo? Here lies one of Australia's most promising natural gas reserves, a 30,000 square kilometre area capable of transforming the territory's energy landscape, fuelling domestic demand and powering international markets. Given Australia's current energy challenges, you'd expect federal Labor to prioritise such a resource. But last night, Madam Speaker, the budget completely ignored it. Again, not a cent, not $1 to accelerate development in the Beetaloo Basin. This is neglect, Madam Speaker, on the highest order. Just months ago, we urged the Prime Minister, after his visit for the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy, to provide federal support to help the Beetaloo Basin reach full productivity and capacity, highlighting its enormous potential to secure Australia's energy independence, reduce domestic energy costs and position the territory as a leading energy exporter. But this critical appeal has fallen on deaf ears, Madam Speaker. The Albanese Labor government seems oblivious to the strategic importance of the territory. They simply don't grasp our potential, our capability or our value to the entire nation. And this now brings me, Madam Speaker, to defence infrastructure, another critical area neglected by federal Labor. Given our geographical proximity to Asia, the territory plays an indispensable role in Australia's defence posture. Our military installations such as Larrakia Barracks in Darwin, the RAF bases at Tyndall near Katherine aren't optional extras. They are fundamental to national security. The Northern Territory provides Australia's frontline defence, acting as vital surveillance hub over the entire Indo-Pacific region. Yet despite this strategic imperative, last night's budget delivered nothing new. No additional investment to enhance our defence infrastructure or our capabilities. It has been highlighted to the Prime Minister that the Northern Territory is a critical front line for national security, stressing that additional troops and investment are urgently needed, both behind the wire and beyond, to bolster our defence capabilities and support our long-term economic growth. Yet last night, Madam Speaker, Canberra completely ignored that strategic imperative. Madam Speaker, Labor seems to misunderstand or deliberately ignore the significance of the Northern Territory in Australia's defence planning. We are not just on the front line, Madam Speaker, we are the front line. We host crucial deployments of Allied forces, particularly the United States Marines and now the Japanese Self-Defence Force, enhancing Australia's defence readiness and our relationships in the region. How can any federal government serious about national security overlook additional investment in our all too critical defence infrastructure? It absolutely beggars belief, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Territorians have every right to feel angry today. We contribute greatly to the nation, providing economic opportunities, strategic defence capabilities, cultural richness and a unique environmental assets. We are on the front line, as I've said, Madam Speaker. Yet in return, all we receive are scraps from Canberra's table. Labor's 3 federal representatives, Luke Gosling, Marion Scrimgeour and Malarndirri McCarthy, have failed spectacularly in advocating for us, advocating for the people of the Northern Territory. Their silence and lack of action in Canberra has damaged our prospects. They should hang their heads in shame. Madam Speaker, Territorians deserve absolutely better. We deserve a federal government that recognises our immense potential and invests accordingly. We deserve representatives who fight passionately and tirelessly, who put the Territory first every single day, Madam Speaker. This budget was a test for the Albanese Labor government. It was their chance to demonstrate a genuine commitment to our Northern Territory. It was their opportunity to deliver on countless promises and finally show that Territorians really matter. But instead, they've abandoned us. They've left us behind. Madam Speaker, enough is enough. It's time for every Territorian, whether they live in Darwin, Katherine, Alice Springs, Tennant Creek and our remote regions, to stand up and say to federal Labor, we will no longer accept this kind of neglect. This budget has failed the Northern Territory comprehensively. It has failed our economy, failed our future, which then fails the people of the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, it is a disgrace. It's shameful and we must not allow it to continue. I urge all Territorians today, hold Labor to account. Demand better, demand fairness, and demand a government that actually recognises the value of the Northern Territory to the rest of Australia. Madam Speaker, our people in the Northern Territory are resilient, they're strong, and they are incredibly capable. Investing in the Territory isn't just about supporting our region, it's about strengthening and supporting the entire nation. We have that capability, Madam Speaker. We have that capacity. We can do that for the rest of the country from here in the Northern Territory. And every dollar spent here contributes directly to a stronger, more secure and more prosperous nation. Canberra had the opportunity to act on this wisdom, but instead they chose neglect. But we cannot keep doing more with less. We cannot continue being forgotten by federal Labor. Madam Speaker, this budget must be a wake-up call. Canberra must recognise our worth, fund our future properly and treat Territorians with the respect that we deserve. Madam Speaker, we will continue to fight because our territory is worth it, our people are worth it. And it's about time Canberra understood that as well, Madam Speaker. We see the development opportunities available here in the Territory, in our infrastructure corridors, our infrastructure hubs, and of course in Middle Arm. And last night, Madam Speaker, rather than federal Labor taking money that they have tucked away in equity and hidden in Infrastructure Australia, which is not actual cash, it just sits on their books. They never removed any of that money out of equity, even though we've been asking for it to be moved to cash, so we can start to deliver on these all-important projects for the Northern Territory. Just last week, we heard the Darwin Major Business Group present its report into the future of the Northern Territory. And that future was very, very clear, Madam Speaker. It said for the Territory to grow and dig itself out of the financial mess that the previous Labor government placed us in, we need to drive private investment in the Northern Territory. And to drive that private investment, Madam Speaker, we need the government to invest in the infrastructure corridors and our infrastructure hubs so that private investment can commence and take place. Private investment and the private sector will drive the Territory's growth and drive the Territory's economy. But what did we get last night from federal Labor, Madam Speaker? Not $1 of that equity money sitting in Infrastructure Australia was released to start driving these projects to drive the Territory out of the economic issues that we face that are inherited from the previous government. It's an absolute shame, Madam Speaker, that the federal government doesn't understand this. We've been passing this message on for many, many months now, and they still have not listened. But I said, Canberra need to listen to us today. Territorians need to stand up and say that we won't take this anymore. We need the federal government to support us here in the Territory and drive our growth. Maintenance money from the federal government is no longer enough, Madam Speaker. We need that direct investment into our infrastructure so that we can grow the Territory, so we can make this place what it can be. We can make the Northern Territory the economic powerhouse of Australia. We have the capacity and the capability, Madam Speaker, to be the next Western Australia. We have the resources, the minerals and the gas to be able to drive our economy forwards and be a powerhouse in the economic development of Australia. But we need that hand up from the federal government. I'm not asking for a handout, Madam Speaker, I'm asking for a hand up. I need the federal government to commit on their promises to take that money out of equity, move it over into cash so we can start delivering on these infrastructure projects that will drive our economy forward, which will improve our private sector investment, which will create jobs for the Territory, which will create economic wealth and benefit for all Territorians. I thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to bring this statement to the House this morning, and I move that the report be noted.